Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, where leadership meets entertainment. I'm joined by my favorite co-host, Ron Ward. He likes to write his intros. Ron, how we doing today?
Are you saying I'm not your favorite?
Well, you're the only, so.
Oh, I thought you were moonlighting or something. I'm doing great. Just finished a great executive coaching session. That always excites me.
Yeah.
But here's something exciting, Kristin. I stole your thunder. You know, you get so excited over researching our numbers. So I decided to do my own, and I went on Buzzsprout. And you've probably said this, but it was so exciting to me to go in and look at all that. There was a couple of countries, I'm going to be honest, I hadn't heard of.
Same.
We have been downloaded in 71 countries. So
that's pretty awesome.
We certainly, everyone knows us, we're very proud Americans, but we love everybody. And for all of you in different countries that are listening to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, we thank you. We are so grateful. That was so exciting. And I see why I might get addicted to looking at these stats as well.
I love stats.
Go ahead.
It's really cool. Like, we are proud patriots, proud Americans. And if we can be a beacon of hope and light for folks in other countries that really have never tasted the freedom that we have here, and they get to live vicariously through us and watch us, speak out for it. And I think it's pretty awesome. It's powerful.
Yeah, because there are countries listed, Kristin, that do not have the freedoms that we have in America. And if you are one of them, we're thinking about you, and things can change.
Right.
You know, kingdoms get toppled. So hang in there, be strong, and thanks for listening to us.
Yes.
Also, I wanted to remind, because this is all the pressure's on Kristin, so it's easy for me. If you go in and rate our podcast, you screenshot that, DM Kristin or me, and you want to provide the size t-shirt you want, color, and your address. By the way, we do not share your address, and we don't stalk. Well, Kristin might, but I don't. And you will get a free t-shirt, and I have to compliment Kristin. She doesn't send cheap stuff. She got the best material, and these are very cool t-shirts. We want a picture of you wearing that t-shirt, and we will put
the
it
stipulation.
Yeah, that's a stipulation. But if you happen to have big muscles and good looking, skip it. Okay, back to you, Kristin.
Oh, goodness. I love it. Yeah, I sent a few out last week, and so we'll have some more pictures posted. And I have 2 more going out to a few ladies that went in and rated. So thank you so much. So we should be seeing more pictures posted here soon. One of my friends who listens to our podcast and has since the beginning, he's a professional arm wrestler. So we'll be seeing another buff dude in a t-shirt here soon. Oh, goodness.
Well, Kristin, I just want to say, I know we're delving in, but I am seeing a pattern. I just want to say that.
Hey, you know what? I have a lot of alpha male followers. I don't know what
ladies,
to say.
Take care of me. Don't let Kristin have all the glory.
Yes. All right. So thank you, everybody, though, for sending the pictures and for supporting us. And today we're going to discuss a taboo topic. Woo! Big surprise that we went taboo. I mean, that's our MO here. But it's important that we do things that others do not. So, and that is unhealthy church leadership. I think everybody knows by now that Ron and I are both Christians, and this is not a slight at Christianity whatsoever, or religion or faith, but this is a leadership topic. And we want to go into how to identify this unhealthy leadership and what you can do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Kristin, this is near and dear to me, as you know, and I have, I grew up early in life in church. I rebelled, ran away, and then later I came back, and I attended what would be called a charismatic church. And I'm the kind of person, if I go to church, I don't want to feel like I went to a PTA meeting. I want to know I went to church. And I went to a church that was very gifted, people talented, and I saw some wonderful things. And recently I
Can I interject? Because like living in the Pacific Northwest my entire life, and a lot of people that aren't, I would say, is a charismatic church more common in the South? And really, what is that?
Not at all, because the Word of Faith movement, the biggest place is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. As a matter of fact, you get off the
Okay.
airport. When I went there, it was a banner that said Jesus is Lord. It is called the Bible Belt. So I know that you're not as familiar, but trust me, it's worldwide. It's
Yeah.
huge. As
And
a matter of
it's
fact,
charismatic. Okay.
it had such an impact. It's Pentecostal based,
Okay.
but it had such an impact because they were the first people that had real bolsterous praise and worship where people lifted their hands. And the next
Mm,
thing you know, the Southern Baptist Convention, they're doing the same thing. So there's a lot of positive things, or at least I would see that as a positive, of being a little more demonstrative about your faith.
mm-hmm.
There's a lot of great things that came out of the
Right.
charismatic Word of Faith movement. But I got turned on to this podcast called Mega Maniacs, and it's a play on words of mega churches. And
Mm,
Robyn Torgrimson is doing it, and she was the former HR person at World Harvest Church. And the pastor there is Rod Parsley. His daughter Ashton is a big part of that church.
right.
And the Robyn was an HR person, and she started. Number one, there's a viral video of Ashton Parsley, and she is scolding people for not giving enough money. I mean, it's
Wow.
really abusive, and it went viral. So that was a starting point because someone in our company went to World Harvest Bible College, but I won't
Mm.
mention his name, but it's Gary. And now I've been joking with him. Gary went a long time ago. And I do think, just like a lot of companies, I think it started off well, and you get domineering personalities. You and I
Mm.
have talked a lot
Yeah.
about narcissism,
Right.
but also people get worshiped. Um, just one more quick foundation. Think about this. We'll use World Harvest. You've got someone, Rod Parsley is one of the most dynamic, articulate speakers you'll ever see. He's like a TD Jakes as well. Do you
Mm.
know that name,
No.
TD
I
Jakes?
was gonna just
My
play
God,
along,
we
but
got to
no.
do so. We got to pray for Kristin. TD Jakes is
Oh
an African
man.
American speaker, started in West Virginia. His church is in Dallas, one of the most revered ministers he's been on Oprah. I mean, he's all over the place.
Mm.
But there are videos, and I'm praying that this is not right, but there's a picture of him and P. Diddy, and we
Oh
may get
geez.
into that saga, but there are people that say that he was trying to mentor P. Diddy. So I don't know the
Mm.
answer to that. I don't want to go
Yeah.
there. But Rod Parsley is in that class of speaker that TD Jakes are, who TD Jakes is. So I believe that things started off well in early days because Gary did not see near the stuff that started happening. And he said there was
Mm.
wonderful people. He went to the Bible College, which is now called Valor,
Okay.
and it's accredited. So he didn't have those kind of experiences. But wow, when you start watching and seeing, and we're going to lay out, you may be wondering, we're starting to hit some topics like NASA last week. And we're covering this topic because a lot of Americans attend church, and we want you to have a good experience and not be vulnerable or naive,
Right.
and stick with your guns and use the leadership principles that you've heard on this podcast and that you've been taught.
Yeah, I know it is key. And that was an awful story. I did see a little bite-size video about that. But my church background, I grew up in the church, same thing, and went every Sunday, Wednesday night youth group. And for me, I feel like, and it was at 16 years old when I was baptized, but in the beginning, we went to, I would consider it a mega church here in the Pacific Northwest. And I never felt like with the youth group program, I did it because my parents wanted me to go, but I never felt like a part of something, I guess you would say.
Mhm.
And so then I remember in 8th grade when my friends had started going to a smaller startup church, and they were literally renting the auditorium of a local high school. And I loved it. They had a great youth
Yeah.
program, and the kids seemed like cool kids. I guess, I always thought the kids at my youth group at the prior church were just, they just seemed different, not like relatable or tangible, I guess. So it was a great experience, but unfortunately that church at this point I had moved away to New York and then moved back and started attending church here in Oregon, but that church got really big, that startup.
Yeah.
And they ended up, and this is what's so sad, is they ended up taking a large government subsidy, right? Or the bailout funds in 2020. I don't know exactly what they were called for the churches, but they took it and they didn't tell their
loans, I think. But
yeah, exactly. They didn't tell their parishioners, and so they were still, going about the day to day. But they had this huge secret because they took a ton of money from the government, and the parishioners were giving what they could during that time, understanding that the attendance was low, therefore they didn't have enough money, right? So it was really bad, and it shook up the church and the leadership. There was some changes, and you saw a lot of nastiness that came from it. And I think it's sad when you look back at something like that, but it just, to our point of covering this, is it just shows that self-interest, it's not immune to, church is not immune to it, right? It's in every facet of society. So I think it is important for us to empower folks to be able to, when they're attending church, ask the tough questions of church leadership, and really know, if you're going to get involved there, understand what they stand for, right? Because outside of the Bible, there's a lot of self-interest.
Yeah, there is. And guys, you do not want to miss the end of this episode. We're going to give a little bonus content, and then we're going to hit something that is extremely controversial. And so don't miss that. Stay until the end. I gave Kristin the bulk of that, of course, to go over, since she loves controversy. But okay, so I wanted to give a very brief background. Chris and I was in youth ministry for many, many years. We had a dynamic. It was one of the greatest times of my life. We had drama skits. We had a worship team that was so gifted. It was just an amazing, and I worked with two different youth ministries as well. As a matter of fact, there was a time I contemplated, I actually went full time at my church for 11 months, and then I went back to the government. You didn't know that about me.
No.
And it was both a great experience and a terrible experience. I told someone I looked behind the veil of church leadership and didn't like what I saw.
Yeah.
So again, we're hitting this from an area to help you. And if you're not involved in church, listen, this is leadership, what we're talking about. You can apply these principles anywhere, and you'll see this play out in every workplace and every organization. It's the same, but there is an added layer of vulnerability. And Chris and I talked about this before we started recording. A lot of people who attend church, they really want a connection to God. Of course they do. And then they see the ministry leaders, Catholic, Protestant, it goes in every religion. They see the ministry leaders as kind of a connection to God. And whether they mean to do that or not, we know that Christ, for us Christians, is our connection to God. But we want to have favor with church leaders. People do a lot of great things for their pastor, church leaders, and that's all good. There's scriptures to support that. The problem happens when that level of vulnerability gets manipulated, and when church leaders begin to take advantage of people because they are tenderhearted, because they love God, because they don't want to be disrespectful to God's leaders as they see them. And I think all of these principles will apply to any company if you're listening, but there is that extra layer of vulnerability and sometimes naivete with church members.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I want to go over a few things that happen in a toxic church environment, and it may sound familiar to some, and hopefully not many of you. But there are too many expectations often placed on church members, and I have a statistic here. According to one of the search engines that we went into, what is that, Ron?
Delate, but
Delate. All right. Sometimes I need Ron's help pronouncing things. So 77% of surveyed individuals reported experiencing burnout while in their current job position. And this is within churches. And to make matters worse, I mean, that's a huge number. over half of those individuals admitted to suffering multiple rounds of burnout. We've done a whole episode on burnout, and I feel like now more than ever, that is something a lot of folks are experiencing. So just by those numbers, there's a very good chance that those are members of your congregation are dealing with burnout right now. And, because many church activities are planned and arranged by a select group of core members. And that naturally will make them feel overburdened. And the congregation members are one of the most overburdened is one of the most common signs of bad church leadership, right? So you may see that if you're constantly being pushed to volunteer, or you at least see that, you hear that regular volunteers are taking longer and longer to get back to you if you're the one asking for volunteerism. Events are being met with a decrease in enthusiasm. And then newcomers are always being saddled with major responsibilities. That's one good way to turn people off. Do you want to talk about why this is such a problem?
Yeah, because think about this. Number one is a great strategy. Even in youth ministry, I used to have at least half the youth involved in some way. I mean, they would welcome people, play music, be in skits, all of these things. If I had people that was really good with software, they would do our website, or they would do other things online. So that's it gives people buy-in. It's a great leadership style. The problem is a lot of times the leaders don't factor in. Number one, you're there for church services, 2 hours, a minimum, and that doesn't include getting, dressed and getting the family there. Then you're volunteering one night a week or whatever. Then you have some weekend event and you need to do that. And it gets to the point where your family suffers. Yeah. And I saw this over and over. In the pulpit, we're preaching, be a good dad, be a good mother, be a good husband, be a good wife. And then we're wearing you out. You're exhausted and you have no time for your family. So you can overburden people with responsibilities. And we've said this many times, the amiable personality on the personality chart, they will take on extra work, more and more work, because they are that type. They don't like conflict. They want everything to be harmonious. And then they get burned out. So it's a serious problem, and people need to, I have a friend that calls it work-life harmony instead of work-life balance. But
I like it.
Those two do need to harmonize.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
This next one, I'm only going to cover a little bit, Kristin, you can weigh in. There aren't enough expectations placed on members. What that means, it's not contradicting the previous. You're given responsibilities, but then you're not communicated with on what's expected of you. And then you're scolded because maybe you did this wrong. So I've seen in all my years of attending church, I've seen a lot of communication problems where people just don't know what is expected of them.
Right. And that's just like in the corporate world. If you don't know what's expected of you, yet you're told you didn't meet expectations, that is not your issue, right? And that's just a sign of a bad leader. So it's, church or corporate or, wherever, you need to know what's expected of you. And I can only imagine that often they're met with a passive aggressive response, because when someone's not on your payroll, I mean, some of them have, right? They're paid, but when someone's not on your payroll, you don't have that same ability to hold them accountable. So I can imagine communication has that passive aggressive undertone more often than not. And, just going into, decision making dictated by politics. This one's near and dear to my heart. And I have to tell you that this last go round in 2020, I was going to one church and then switched to another. That one seemed to be a little woke. The reason I left the first one in the first place is because the energy, I guess, they didn't do a good enough job trying to grow the church. And so I felt like I was one of the youngest people there. I'm 43. That really shouldn't be the case. So I really wanted a better youth program. So we tried another church that had a great youth program, but it seemed woke. And when I say woke, dictated by government policy and procedure, right? Like just so and we talk about, and then the one I'm at currently doesn't seem to have that, right? So there's just so many layers to this. But decision making in a church, when it's dictated by politics, that can be a nightmare. And it's also a sign of bad church leadership is keeping deacon boards and pastors, it's keeping them up late at night. And because instead of making decisions that are true to their heart, they're making decisions dictated by politics, which is just never going to sit well with anybody. So every time a decision has to be made, you have to scheme and strategize, almost like a presidential campaign manager to get results. But that shouldn't be the case in a church, right? So Ron, why do you think that that's happening so often?
I think it's human nature, number one. And if you set up so that your governing board can be politicized, you're asking for it in a lot of ways. But I've heard stories of people leaving a church because they put in a different color carpet than they wanted. I've heard of people who actually pay for pews and nobody's allowed to sit in it. They come in and somebody's in their pew and they made a move. So there's a lot of crazy church stories.
Wow.
But when you should have overseers, the Bible teaches that. There's apostles. There's fivefold ministry: apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastors, teachers. Apostles are supposed to be overseers like Paul was in the Bible. But there shouldn't be 10 votes and strategy and all this to replace the carpet. So that's what happens. It's basically what we call red tape or bureaucracy. It comes right in the church.
I've been either uninvolved enough to not experience that, or I don't know what, because a lot of that just sounds so foreign to me. But, when I talked about switching churches, when I was wanting to get involved. And so at the second one that I tried since 2020, and I reached out to church leadership. I wanted to make sure that if there were more government mandates, that the church wasn't going to shut its doors, right? I mean, because if we think of the absurdity of that, we're here in Oregon, so marijuana is legal, right? So all of the dispensaries remained open, all the liquor stores remained open, but churches were supposed to shut down and you weren't allowed to sing.
They were essential. Marijuana is essential.
Right.
God is not.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to make sure that where I was going to be putting, again, like we talked about the work-life harmony, like if I'm going to volunteer somewhere, I want to make sure that they are aligned with my moral compass. And so I had reached out and I said, I just want to know how you would handle a future pandemic. Because we all know that was just a test for us, right? And so they basically said they would, in a nutshell, with a lot of fluff, that they would follow government, whatever the government told them to.
Yeah.
And so that's why I switched. And so then I've had that conversation with the new pastor. And so I'm currently where I'm at because where I'm at says, they're not going to close. Right. So I think that's really important. And I think it's important for people to ask those tough questions. It doesn't have to be that specifically. It doesn't have to be about carpet. That one is so wild to me. But it's important to, like, if you are going to put your time and energy into somewhere, into a church, which I think is wonderful, make sure that you're asking the tough questions, because that can avoid a lot of this, just all these wild situations that people are put through.
And Kristin, this is not to offset. You should ask those questions, but also that can be the demise of unity in a ministry, is that everyone wants their way. And I'm not talking about what you were saying. Right. That's a whole different level, but carpet and things like that, you need to chill out and move on. Yeah. Anyway, on our list here, number 4 was gossip. And that's one of the biggest mistakes church leadership can make. And I saw that. There would be leadership meetings, but they would be talking about members, and this person did that, and this person, isn't paying tithe. I had that come up in front of everyone, that this person isn't paying their tithe. So church gossip, and by the way, I always tell people this: no matter what you're doing, you're giving tacit approval for the people to do it to you. So if you're gossiping, they're going to gossip about you eventually. And so that's something that leadership needs to address and be confidential. And the greatest supervisor I ever had, and this was a female, a boss I had from DC, she would not gossip about anything. You couldn't get any information, but you also knew I could trust her with my life. If I tell her something, she'll never repeat it. And I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Steel jaw. That's huge. I have to just say, it's really cool. This warmed my heart because I pride myself to be a good leader. Even when I'm leading my 8th graders once a week, I had printed out my 8th graders. I have 7 of them, right? So I had printed out a job aid, to help them write this essay. Well, that confused a few of them because there was a certain way they were supposed to write it. My job aid was only supposed to help them with ideas of what to fill in. But 2 of them were like, oh, we formulated ours after yours, what you provided us. And I was like, I am so sorry. I could see how that would really confuse you. And they were beating themselves up because it wasn't what was required. And I was like, that's 100% on me. I could see how that was confusing. One of my new students said, "You are a very gracious teacher." And
wow.
it just warmed my heart because and then I stopped and I told them, in life, a good leader will always take ownership when they've made a mistake, even something as small and unintentional as providing them something that drove them in the wrong direction, right?
Yeah.
And I thought that was, one, it warmed me for sure, but then 2, it was a great lesson for them to understand that that's what leadership looks like.
I use a slogan in my leadership course. I say, take the blame, share the credit. I say that multiple times.
Amen.
Hey, do you mind if we trade on these next 2? Because I have
By
personal
all means.
involvement. This next one is the pastor calls all the shots. Now, we talked about before when you have a bunch of church boards and bureaucracy, but then the church I'm talking about, the one that I listen to the podcast, Mega Maniacs, Rod Parsley, calls all the shots. And the family, as a matter of fact, if you are on that campus and they walk in a room, you have to stand up, Kristin.
Oh, dear
if any
Lord.
of the Parsley family.
Kamala makes people do that.
Oh, great.
Yeah, they can't look her in the eye and they all have to stand up.
Great.
When she walks in a room.
So if you look at that, I believe this. I don't believe there's been very few human beings in the face of the planet that could handle too much authority and power. So if you have one person calling the shots, they begin, and there's decision-making, Kristin, that you know that I train, but there's one called the recency effect. And that's people who make decisions based on the latest thing they heard. Like if you were the last person to talk to me, that's the decision I make. It's called the recency. And there's people that do that because it's fresh on my mind, or top of mind, as they say. So what happens is a pastor gets this authority, their personality gets involved. They have the inner sanctum of people who are butt kissing up to them and manipulating them. So then they start to make the decisions based on what this one little group does. And it's just, it's a disaster. So although I don't believe in too much bureaucracy, there has to be some type of oversight. It's like the balance of powers in our government, from judicial to legislative to the executive branch. There's a balancing out effect, and you got to have that in church, just like you do in government.
Oh, absolutely. And what's an episode we could point people to? We've done one on, where you have the brown nosers, and we've touched on that type of leadership where they just really, they love it. They fall for it, right into the trap of these brown nosers.
It just so happens
my boss is a narcissist. That's probably one good one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Anyway, you go ahead. No,
Okay,
I was looking at our episodes.
We have so many good ones. I'm like, yeah, we've covered that. All right. So this is also something to look out for. And if conflict is the norm at your church, that's no bueno here. So every Christian has either been in or heard of a congregation full of high conflict personalities. I mean, goodness, we're just talking about how people get angered over carpet color or pews and seating arrangements, right? Like it can be very petty, like anywhere. So you couldn't just have a disagreement about the upcoming Thanksgiving potluck menu, right? Everyone and their mother had to chime in while adding a few choice insults. Generally, I'm assuming they're going to be passive aggressive, just knowing.
Yeah.
church people in general. But so here's a few signs here. If members are routinely insulting or condescending towards each other, you might have a problem. Also, if there's persistent culture of disrespect, just like what you were talking about when they're speaking poorly behind somebody's back, but in front of a group, that is by design to cut somebody down and take away their power, right?
Exactly.
Huge fights. I mean, this one's got to be, gosh, a huge issue here. Glaring red light. Huge fights or displays of anger. If that's a regular occurrence, you might have a problem.
Mm-hmm. So, Kristin, let's tie that in with the next one, which is people blaming one another, because it's similar, that culture. But I will tell you a technique that I've seen great leaders do. And I'm not saying I'm a great leader, but I've done this before. If you speak up immediately, I call it a culture of feedback. For example, one person says to another something that's degrading. And right in that moment, you go, wait a minute. No, don't speak to them that way.
Mm-hmm.
If you do little things like that, that changes that culture.
Yes.
That's unacceptable. The problem is we sit back and ignore it, and it grows. The bullying gets stronger.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go into, there's always chaos. And in you, I saw, you've got a banking background, and I don't know how it is. I don't know how the sausage is made, but I usually walk in a bank. It always looks organized and tidy.
Mm-hmm.
People are doing their thing. But I began to see, I've said this before, so I won't go into detail. When we had a hurricane morning, we were in chaos at the academy. Early on, our scheduling, we didn't have a scheduling software. We're doing them by paper. Imagine that. When I started, we got all these schedules laid out on conference room tables, because we're running multiple programs and you only have a certain number of instructors. So the bottom line is I saw chaos. Mm-hmm. If you look around and you're seeing disorganization repeatedly, it's time for a timeout. It's time to put systems in place. And by the way, Kristin and I have both admitted we're big picture people. I'm not naturally organized. But guess what I did? I called on my analytical people, and I brought everyone together, and I said, you're going to lead us and help us get this organized next time.
Right.
We ran those hurricane drills because sometimes you got to create crisis. So we pretended we're getting another hurricane. What are we going to do? Yes. We went through a deal, made a check sheet, did all this stuff. The next time, you would not believe, I would say we had 85% improvement by taking a time out, calling a meeting. So look for chaos. And if you see chaos around, you're responsible. You're the leader, and you call a meeting and use your resources and get things organized.
Right. And I'll tell you, to, your observation of the bank, one of the reasons that you don't generally see chaos at a bank is because there are huge amounts of checks and balances when you're in banking. You're not only audited twice a year by a corporate auditor. You could actually have an auditor from the state come. You also have, everybody has to balance their drawers. Everyone has to balance the vault. Like, there's so many checks and balances in place, and that just goes into accountability. That's one of the reasons banking really worked for my personality, is because all of these rules, 99% of the rules in place made sense. And that really worked well for me. So generally, people in banking know what's expected of them, and they carry it out every day. Of course, you can always have your few that have personality issues. But
you heard it, folks. Balance your drawers.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah. I mean, have some expectations of your people. Okay, so this one is interesting. So the congregation's needs are routinely ignored. And it's important to understand that no church leadership team really wants to sit down and brainstorm a way to deprive the congregation of its needs, right? Just like in an office. It's often something that just happens over time. I think a lot of times people are taken for granted. You talked about that personality trait where they will say yes to anything. A lot of times people with the least give the most, and time included, right? And so you'll see that even sometimes it's not even intentional, but leadership teams will take advantage of that personality trait.
So good, Kristin.
Right?
It's such a dichotomy. Christ said, feed my sheep, but instead we're beating up the sheep and starving them. And it's supposed to be a church should be a haven. It's where you
It
get
should.
strength and love and peace and joy and all these things you're supposed to experience. And the leadership's supposed to be for you and your family.
Right.
And it's mind-boggling how that gets flipped upside down because of
Yes.
the lack of leadership that we're talking about.
Yeah. And that's just like the government also, right? If we go back to our founding fathers, we should never fear the government. They should fear us, we the people, right? And so it's the same thing. We don't want our pastors fearing parishioners, but we want there to be that mutual respect, right? So where we understand and it's visibly palpable that the people are at the utmost importance, and we should be working for them. So yeah, that's, one of the things I just want to point this out. If you hear congregants, saying that they're not being spiritually fed, that's a bad sign, right? Like I've definitely experienced that where I feel like I'm not being fed.
Yeah.
If people are dragging their feet when it comes to pursuing church objectives, that's another sign. If folks have been running on empty for an extended period of time, that's another sign. If this is you or if you're a leader in a church, these are things to pay attention to.
And Kristin, there's something called season of life, and we've talked about it.
Yeah.
But let's say that you do have, like Rod Parsley, they have camp meeting. It lasts a week. So the staff is there day and night. You're cleaning the church next day. You're there at church at night, revivals, all of these things. If you do a big event, like my sister's church, they do a big fall festival. It's huge. You got to give your team a break, a respite. Let them go recharge. Say, don't even come to church next Sunday. You go rest, be with your family. You've done a great job. You've helped us put together this festival, whatever it is. But church leaders don't get that. They do not get that because it seems sacrilegious for you to say, take off Sunday. You don't have to attend church.
Right.
They wouldn't dare, or most leaders wouldn't. So anyway, we're going to hit a couple more. Stay with us, folks. You got to hear this bonus one because I'm telling you, it's controversial. You don't want to miss it. So the next one is there's no long-term strategy. I'm going to be very brief, but we do see a lot of building programs and things like that. But leaders do need to ask church, like you said, the key thing, Kristin, you said there was no younger people.
Mm-hmm.
And that means there was no vision to attract younger people. There was no strategy for that. I say this to leaders all the time. The message doesn't change. The method does.
Mm-hmm.
You can't reach 70-year-old adults the same way you're going to reach 20-year-old kids.
Right.
It's just the reality. If it's movie night, whatever it is, you got to do things to attract younger people.
Right.
And with no strategy, it's just not going to happen. And I think you fell victim to that. You were in a place where they had no vision.
Exactly. And it's really interesting. I like to tie everything back to politics, but one party does really well at attracting the youth, right? And they're just, bar none, the Democratic Party. They know how to get youth engaged. And yes, they have a lot of factors that are helping them out. But that is, something I've seen with the Republican Party is when you go to events, generally, I mean, again, I'm 43. Generally, I'm one of the youngest people there.
Yeah.
And I always tell when I speak at these events, I'm like, y'all need to invite your kids, invite your grandkids, like they're voter age. Like this is wild. Like we have, so it's really important. The same approach needs to happen in the church. You need to think about generations to come. And have that mindset of growth. So always have that bench, and that plays out in business, in politics, and in the church. So you're right. That is what. And what happened was it just felt sleepy. I would go and I wasn't feeling fed because it just felt low energy, and it really wasn't. I didn't feel like that, like I belonged, not because someone was isolating me, but because the messaging was not for my age. It wasn't for a mother with children, right? It was for someone who's 70, 80. So anyhow, why don't we jump into that? I think we should jump into the little bit you put together, unless
the
you
bonus.
Want to. Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Okay. I did want to say, only because it's part of my book, Kristin, when the next to the last one where it says results don't matter enough. And what that means is we have traditions that we're not going to touch because we've been doing it for 50 years, not because it's biblical. And
Right.
I told a story, Kristin, in my book about my dad took me to a wake, and in the country they would bring the body home. Have I told you that before? They had the
No.
body laying in the den. So, and it was in the country because the funeral home
Oh,
was a
yes.
distance.
I
Yeah,
did
it's one
hear.
of the
Yes, it's
funniest. I
coming
don't
back
want to
to me.
retell it, but it's one of the
Right.
funniest stories. It's the first time I'd ever seen a corpse, and there's a fly crawling in out of the corpse's nose.
Ooh, yikes.
So I tell the story's so funny. I went to my sister's church, ironically, and a lady grabs me in the hallway and goes, "You had me laughing at 1:00 this morning, and I can't believe you're here." Like it was in Virginia, and
Oh.
so that story is really funny. It's worth reading.
Oh, yeah.
But I said in that I was just a kid, so I just thought you bring caskets home, like that's what you do.
Right.
And it wasn't until I became a teenager that tradition finally, like people just stopped doing it. And of course, they built more funeral homes within an hour drive. But that's what happens a lot of times is traditions. We're doing things, and everyone knows the story
Yeah.
about the lady cooking, and she cut off part of the turkey. And finally, someone said, "Why'd you do that?" And she said, "Well, my mom did it." And then she asked her mom, and her mom said, "Well, my mother did it." And then they finally asked the grandmother, and she said, "Yeah, because I didn't have a big enough kettle." I had to cut
Oh,
off part of
that's funny.
So it just kept going on.
Right.
And I would only let my daughters have half a piece of gum. And I was with my daughter one day, handed her a piece of gum. She ripped it in half, put a piece in her mouth. And
Oh,
I said,
that's
"Do you
funny.
realize?" She goes, "I know. I've been doing it since I was a kid. You'd never give us it." And she still did it. Point made.
Yeah.
You need to evaluate traditions. You need to evaluate company policy and procedures. Is this beneficial? Is this the same message? Is there a better method that we could use?
I love
Kristin,
it.
take it
I'm going to
away.
think about that gum piece.
I know.
That's
Less
pretty
sugar.
awesome.
Less
Oh my
sugar.
goodness. Is that what it was? Was it an
That's why I did it. I did it
I
in
like
an
it.
attempt to, they would get a little bonus, but they got half the sugar and they didn't know the difference.
Good for you.
And it's also the way I told them ramen noodles was a very expensive soup that we could only use occasionally. And it wasn't until my daughter was 16, she saw the price in a grocery store and I got outed.
Oh, that's hilarious. Why? Because it's absolute crap for you. You didn't want them wanting
Well,
it.
it was it's the easy meal for me. Like, you pour a little water in it, throw it in the microwave.
Oh, got it. I thought you were okay.
If you are listening, by the way, don't pour all of that sodium in there. Just pour about half that little container and it won't be so unhealthy. But I would do it to entertain myself, honestly,
Oh,
Chris.
that
And I go,
is
"Do you
so
girls
funny.
want some of that expensive soup?" And they're like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
So
Like
ramen
I
noodles.
flew it in.
Yeah, it
Oh,
cost
goodness.
me $2.
All right. So here's that bonus we talked about. The woke mindset has come into the church. If you do not accept some of the liberal propaganda, you are considered to be a horrible person. Our scriptural beliefs should not be dictated by trends. Everything from LGBTQ plus to abortion. I know I see rainbows on churches where it says all welcome all over the Portland area. If your beliefs and your conscience do not align, take a stand and don't be intimidated by these types and trends.
Yes, and by the way, Kristin, I think there could be an answer to say LGBTQ plus are welcome. You don't change your beliefs. Everyone should be
Right.
welcome in a church.
Exactly.
But I think what you're talking about, welcome means a whole different thing. We embrace
Right.
your belief system.
Right. Exactly.
And I'm seeing it everywhere, and that is going to be the deciding factor for the church in the coming years. Is where do we draw the line? And
Right.
so this, when the liberal mindset claims that they're inclusive, we know that. And I'm going to say this tongue in cheek, but it's really true. Try telling people that you're a straight white Christian male and see how that works out for you.
Mm-hmm.
We are in a situation where masculinity is being attacked. We're in a situation where our moral compass is being distorted. And if you don't have a value system, when I said the message doesn't change, that's exactly what I was talking about. The method might change, but your message, there's certain things in life that should be etched in stone and you won't budge.
Right.
No matter what the trends are doing, no matter what the cancel culture says, I'm not going to budge from this. And by the way, we may cover this P. Diddy scandal, but I think it's astounding. if you ask me to define two things, I would say there's hypocrisy this year that we've seen, but I've also would say the light has been shown on many of the things that's been happening, the lies, the deceit, and all this stuff. And I think that's going to continue to happen. And but we as Christians, we as people who believe in the values that made this country great, we need to stand on those values and refuse to budge, because we are approaching a time. I don't think our faith has ever really been tested. COVID was the first time shutting church doors, but I don't think we've ever been tested like other people have in other countries, or the way the apostles or disciples. But we may very well be coming to a point where our faith is actually tested in a very challenging way.
Right. Absolutely. I love that, Ron. I was warned about that from, a young girl by my parents, that one day your faith definitely will be tested. And I think we are in the era where that actually is going to be the case.
I think we are.
Definitely. Well, this is a great episode. I'm glad that this was Ron's idea. I think it was something that was needed to touch on, and hopefully it's helpful.
Yeah. All you leaders and Christian leadership, stay strong and be good to your people. Be good to one another. It's not complicated.
And stay focused on the Bible, not all the distractions out there in the world.
That's a good piece of advice right there. Yeah. All right, everyone, be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.